Say you're sorry or you're not coming in, the guard said, and the metal gate dropped with a hollow clang just inches from my bumper, the sound echoing through the quiet cul-de-sac like something final, something decided without me, and the floodlight above the keypad flicked on, washing my windshield in harsh white as his radio crackled at his shoulder, a low static that smelled faintly like hot plastic and cheap wiring. And for a second I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, engine idling, gravel crunching softly under my tires, staring at the house I had paid for, the porch light I left on, the front door that was supposed to open for me, not wait behind a locked gate like I didn't belong there. And then I saw her step into the light, Brenda Collins, white blazer, coffee cup in one hand like she was watching a show she'd already paid for, her smile tight and rehearsed, the kind you give when you think you've already won. And she tilted her head just enough to make it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a performance, and I was the part she'd written for me. You heard him, Ethan, she said, loud enough for the houses around us, loud enough for curtains to shift and silhouettes to gather. It's a simple apology, and then you can go home. And the word home landed wrong, like it didn't belong to me anymore, like it had been reassigned. And I could feel the camera on the gate post angled just slightly toward my car, the small red light blinking. Steady, recording, always recording, and the guard tapped my window again, firmer this time, knuckle against glass, impatience dressed up as authority, and I lowered it halfway, just enough for the cool night air to slip in with the faint smell of cut grass and asphalt still warm from the day. I just want to be clear, I said, keeping my voice even, because volume wasn't the game here. You're telling me I can't access my property unless I apologize to her. And he glanced back at Brenda. Before answering, a quick check like a student looking for approval. That's what I'm telling you, sir. And there it was, simple, clean, stated out loud. And Brenda took a sip of her coffee like punctuation, like she was sealing it. And somewhere down the street a car door shut and footsteps paused, listening, waiting for whatever came next, and she stepped closer to the gate, heels clicking lightly on the pavement, controlled, deliberate. You embarrassed me at the meeting, she said, her tone dropping just enough to make it personal without losing the audience. You questioned the board, you questioned me, and this community has standards. And I could still see that meeting in my head, the stack of papers, the numbers that didn't add up, the way her smile tightened when I asked one simple question. And now here we were, with a metal bar between me and my front door, like that question had followed me home in grown teeth, and the guard shifted his weight, hand resting near the keypad like he owned it, like the code belonged to him instead of the person sitting behind the wheel, and I let a second pass, then another, long enough for the silence to stretch, long enough for every eye watching to lean in. Just a little more, so if I don't say it, I said, looking past him to Brenda, you're going to keep me out, and she didn't hesitate, not even for a breath. Yes, she said, calm, certain, absolute. And that certainty was the most interesting part, not the gate, not the guard, not even the audience, but the way she believed this would hold, that this moment would end with me stepping out, lowering my head, giving her exactly what she wanted, and I nodded once, like I understood, like I accepted the rules she thought she was setting, while the small red light on my dash flickered again, recording everything, every word, every pause, every decision, and I rested my hand on the steering wheel, feeling the texture under my palm, steady, familiar, and thought about how quickly people confuse control with power, how easily they forget the difference when no one has corrected them yet. And Brenda smiled a little wider, mistaking my silence for surrender, and what she didn't know, what none of them knew standing there under that floodlight, was that I wasn't deciding whether to apologize. I was deciding how much of this I needed them to say out loud before it became something they couldn't take back. The silence stretched just long enough for her to believe it belonged to her, and I watched the way Brenda shifted her weight, confident, already rehearsing how this story would sound later when she told it, how she made the difficult resident fall in line, how she protected the standards of the community, and the guard by my window cleared his throat like he was getting tired of waiting, like this was supposed to be simple, quick, a transaction of pride for access. Sir, we do not have all night, he said, and I glanced at the small digital clock on my dashboard, the numbers glowing steady, marking every second they were choosing to do this, every second they were deciding this was normal. Neither do I, I answered quietly, and I let my eyes move again, slow, deliberate, taking in the details that most people miss when they get emotional. The badge clipped to his belt with no city seal, the HOA logo slightly crooked on his shirt, the camera mounted above the keypad angled too low to miss my face, but too high to catch his hands, and Brenda noticed where I was looking, her smile tightening just a fraction, just enough to show she understood I was not reacting the way she expected. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice softer now. Almost reasonable, the kind of tone people use when they want control to look like kindness. "All you have to do is say you are sorry for how you spoke to me." And there it was again, not about rules, not about policy, but about her, about that moment in the meeting when I did not play along, when I asked for the document she could not produce, when the room went quiet and she lost the rhythm she relies on, and I could see it in her eyes now. This was not just about tonight. This was about correcting that imbalance in front of an audience, and I nodded slightly, like I was considering it, like I was weighing the cost, and I let my hand drift toward the center console, not quickly, not in a way that would draw attention, just enough to rest near the dash camera, feeling the faint vibration of it running, recording, storing, and I spoke again, calm, measured. "For the record, you are instructing him to deny me access to my property until I verbally apologize to you." And the guard hesitated this time, just for a second, because when you slow something down and make it official, people start to hear themselves differently. But Brenda stepped in before that hesitation could grow. "Yes, that is correct," she said, crisp, decisive, cutting through the doubt like she always does, and a porch light flicked on 2 houses down. Someone stepping out just far enough to see without being seen, and the guard straightened, reassured by her certainty. "That is the instruction, sir," he added, and I could feel the shape of it now, the outline of what this was becoming, not an argument, not a disagreement, but a documented decision, repeated, confirmed, anchored in their own words, and I let out a slow breath, the kind you take before you commit to a direction, and I leaned back slightly in my seat, giving them a clear view of me. No tension, no raised voice, nothing they could later point to and say I escalated anything. "All right," I said, and Brenda's smile returned, wider now, relieved, victorious, already tasting the apology she thought was coming, and the guard relaxed his shoulders, expecting the same, expecting me to step out, to stand under that light, to give them their moment. But I did not reach for the door handle, I did not unbuckle my seatbelt, I did not move at all, and instead I reached for my phone, slow enough that no one flinched, deliberate enough that everyone noticed, and I tapped the screen, bringing up a contact I knew by memory, not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to see the motion, to understand that the next part was not reaction, it was choice, and Brenda's smile faltered just slightly, just enough to register that something was not following her script. "Who are you calling?" she asked, a hint of irritation slipping through, and I met her eyes through the windshield, the floodlight reflecting back at her. "Someone who will appreciate how clearly you just said all that," I replied, and for the first time since I pulled up to that gate, the air shifted, subtle but real, like the moment before a storm changes direction, and the guard glanced at Brenda again, not for approval this time, but for reassurance, and she held her ground, lifting her chin, doubling down on the version of events she had already committed to, because backing off now would mean admitting this had gone too far, and people like her do not step back once they have an audience. They step forward, even when the ground starts to give, and I placed the call, listening to the first ring cut through the quiet street, steady, patient, inevitable, while the red light on my dash kept blinking, capturing every second they could not take back anymore. The first ring barely finished before the line picked up, and I could hear the low hum of an office in the background, papers moving, a chair shifting, the kind of controlled noise that does not exist out here under a floodlight and a metal gate. "This is Daniel," the voice said, steady, familiar, and I did not raise mine. I did not dramatize it. I just spoke like I always do when something matters enough to be documented. "Daniel, it is Ethan Walker. I need you to note the time. I am being denied access to my residence by a private association under conditional demand." And I could feel the words land differently the moment they left my mouth, not because of volume, but because of structure, because of intent, and the guard by my window shifted again, this time not out of impatience, but uncertainty, while Brenda's expression tightened, her smile flattening into something thinner, sharper, like she was trying to decide whether to interrupt or hold her position, and Daniel's voice came back without hesitation. Time noted. Go ahead. And I continued, still seated, still calm, the engine idling beneath me like a steady metronome. They have verbally confirmed, twice, that access is being withheld until I issue a personal apology to the HOA president. And I let a slight pause follow, just enough for the weight of that sentence to settle in the air between us, and Daniel asked the question I expected, the one that turns a moment into a record. Are they identifying this as an official enforcement action? And I looked directly at Brenda when I answered, giving her every opportunity to hear what came next. Ma'am, for clarity, are you acting in an official enforcement capacity on behalf of the association right now? And she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, the smallest crack, but it was there, and then she straightened, doubling down again, because retreat was no longer an option she could see. Yes, I am, she said, firm, controlled, and I repeated it into the phone, word for word. She has confirmed she is acting in an official enforcement capacity, and the guard swallowed, a subtle movement, but noticeable now that everything had slowed down, and Daniel's tone shifted just slightly, not louder, not urgent, just more precise. Understood, continue documentation, and I nodded even though he could not see me, because this part was not for him, it was for them, for the people standing under that light who were starting to realize this was no longer a neighborhood disagreement, and I glanced once more at the camera on the gate, then back to Brenda. For the record, you are aware that I am the registered owner of this property, I said, and she gave a short nod, irritated now. Of course you are, and I repeated it again into the phone. Ownership acknowledged, and the rhythm of it began to change the space around us. Each statement, each confirmation, turning their certainty into something fixed, something they could not reshape later. And a second guard near the keypad shifted his stance, looking from me to Brenda like he was waiting for new instructions that were not coming. And I could see the audience growing, silhouettes at windows, a porch light flickering again, someone stepping onto a driveway, drawn in by the tension they could not quite name. And I let another breath pass, slow, measured, before I spoke again. This time not as a question, but as a conclusion. Daniel, based on their statements, this constitutes a conditional denial of access tied to a personal demand unrelated to documented policy enforcement. And I let that sit there, not explained, not softened, just stated, and Brenda finally stepped closer to the gate, her heels clicking sharper now, less controlled. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice rising just enough to break the calm she had been holding on to. You are turning this into something it is not. And I looked at her, really looked this time, at the tension in her jaw, the way her grip tightened around the coffee cup, the way control was starting to slip at the edges, and I answered quietly, no, I am letting it become exactly what it is. And for a moment no one spoke, not the guards, not Brenda, not even the people watching, and the only sound was the faint static from the radio and the steady idle of my engine. And then Daniel spoke again, calm as ever. Do you require on-site response or escalation at this time? And I considered that for a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because timing matters. Because escalation only works when the ground has already been prepared. And I glanced once more at the gate, at the metal bar that had been dropped in front of me like a statement, like a line drawn, and then back at Brenda, who was still standing there, still holding on to the version of this moment she had created, and I spoke clearly, evenly, so everyone could hear it. Yes, initiate escalation, I will remain on site. And that was the moment it changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably, like a shift in pressure you feel before you understand it. And Brenda's smile was gone now. Completely gone, replaced by something else, something uncertain, something that had not been there when I first pulled up to that gate, and the red light on my dash kept blinking, steady, patient, capturing the exact second her certainty began to crack the air, did not explode. It tightened, like everything around us had just been pulled one notch too far, and I could see it in the way the guard stopped shifting, stopped pretending this was routine, because routine does not get escalated. Routine does not get documented word for word. and Brenda stood there with that same posture she had walked in with, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, but the stillness around her was different now. Heavier, like the stage she built had turned into something she could not control anymore. "You are overcomplicating this," she said, her voice sharper, less measured, and the word overcomplicating hung there like an accusation. Like the problem was not what she was doing, but how I was reacting to it, and I rested my elbow lightly against the door, keeping my tone even. "No, I am being precise," I said, and precision has a way of making people uncomfortable when they have been relying on vagueness. And one of the guards near the keypad glanced at the other. A quick exchange that did not need words, the kind that says this is no longer what we signed up for. And the radio on his shoulder hissed again, louder this time, a burst of static that cut through the quiet street, and he reached up to adjust it, his hand just slightly less steady than before, and I watched that detail, stored it, because small shifts tell you more than loud ones ever will, and Brenda took a step closer to the gate, closing the distance like she could shrink the situation back, down by force of presence. "You can still fix this right now," she said, lowering her voice again, trying to pull it back into something private even though nothing about this was private anymore. "Just say the words, and this all goes away." And I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it revealed everything, because she still believed this was about a moment, about a sentence, about something that could disappear if I gave her what she wanted, and I shook my head slightly. "It does not go away," I said, quiet enough that she had to listen. "It just becomes something else." And for a second she did not respond, and that second stretched, and in that stretch I could hear distant tires on the main road beyond the subdivision, a car passing, normal life continuing just outside this pocket where everything had narrowed down to a gate, a light, and a decision. And then the second guard spoke up, not to me, but to her, his voice lower, cautious. "Ma'am, maybe we should just let him through and handle it tomorrow." And there it was, the first break in alignment, small but real, and Brenda turned toward him sharply, not angry, but firm in that practiced way that keeps people in line. "No," she said, a single word, clean, final, and he nodded, but it was not the same kind of nod as before. It was slower, less certain, and I could feel the balance shifting, not dramatically, but steadily, like weight moving from one side of a scale to the other, and I glanced at my phone again, still connected, still live, Daniel silent on the other end, listening, recording, waiting, and I knew he was letting me control the pace, because pace is leverage, and I spoke again. This time not as a question, not as a clarification, but as a statement placed exactly where it needed to be. "You understand that by maintaining this position, you are choosing to continue denying access after being informed of the situation." And Brenda looked at me, really looked this time, searching for something she could push against, some crack, some emotion she could use to regain control. But there was nothing there for her to grab, just a man sitting in his own driveway, speaking, clearly, documenting everything. And that is when her confidence shifted into something else, not gone, but altered, sharpened at the edges. "I am choosing to enforce the rules of this community," she said, louder now, projecting again for the people watching, trying to pull the narrative back into something familiar, something she could win, and I nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it, and repeated it into the phone. "She states she is continuing enforcement after notice," and the repetition landed heavier this time, because now it was not just confirmation, it was continuation, it was a choice being made in real time, and somewhere behind me a dog barked once, and then stopped, like even that sound did not want to linger here, and I leaned back slightly in my seat, giving the moment space to breathe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone sit in their own decision. Let it echo. Let it settle. And Brenda crossed her arms, the coffee cup now held tighter against her side, and the floodlight above us buzzed faintly, a low electrical hum that filled the gaps between words. And I could see it clearly now, the entire shape of what was happening, how it started with a demand for an apology and had grown into something documented, something structured, something that would not shrink back down no matter what she said next. And I spoke one more time into the phone, steady, controlled. "I am remaining in place, engine running, no attempt to bypass, awaiting response." And as the words left my mouth, the situation locked into place, not as a confrontation, not as an argument, but as a record, and Brenda stood there on the other side of the gate, still holding on to control and form, but no longer in fact, and the red light on my dash kept blinking, marking every second that control slipped further out of her hands. Time has a way of stretching when people realize they cannot control it anymore. And I could see it settling over Brenda like something unfamiliar, the kind of silence that does not respond to authority, that does not move just because someone expects it to. And she shifted her stance again, slower this time, more deliberate, like she was trying to regain a rhythm that had already slipped past her. "You are still sitting there," she said, almost incredulous, as if the simple act of not complying had become its own kind of offense. And I looked at her without moving, without raising my voice, without offering anything she could push against. "Yes," I said, because sometimes the simplest answers carry the most weight when everything else is being overplayed. And the guard by my window exhaled quietly, the sound barely audible over the faint hum of the floodlight, and he took a small step back from the door, not enough to be obvious, but enough to create space. And space matters in moments like this, because it shows where certainty ends, and Brenda noticed it too, her eyes flicking toward him for just a fraction of a second before returning to me, recalibrating, adjusting, trying to hold the frame together. "You are making a scene," she said, louder now, projecting again, reaching for the audience that had grown behind curtains and porch lights. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we do not tolerate here." And I let that sit for a moment, not because it was true, but because it was useful, because statements like that reveal more than they hide. And I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance toward the houses around us, the faint outlines of people watching, listening, waiting to see how this would resolve. And then I looked back at her. "I am sitting in my car," I said, calm, grounded, on my property access point. And the difference between those two narratives hung there, hers built on performance, mine built on fact. And the guard near the keypad shifted again, his hand hovering over the control box like he was unsure whether to keep holding the line or let it go. And I could see the tension building in that small space between action and hesitation. And then Brenda stepped forward, closing the distance again, her voice dropping lower, tighter. "You think calling someone is going to change this," she said. And there was something else in her tone now, not just control, not just irritation, but doubt, the first real sign of it. And I met her gaze steadily. "No," I said, and she blinked, just once, caught off guard by the answer. And I continued, "I know it already has." And that was when the shift became visible, not just felt, because the guard by the keypad lowered his hand completely, stepping back half a pace, and the other guard adjusted his stance again, this time turning slightly toward Brenda instead of me, waiting for direction that was no longer clear. And the radio crackled once more, a sharp burst of static that seemed louder than before, like it was cutting through something that had already started to unravel. And Brenda looked at them, then back at me. And for the first time since I arrived, she did not speak immediately. She hesitated, searching for a way to reframe this, to pull it back into something she could control. But the structure had already changed. The moment had already been defined. And I could hear Daniel's voice again through the phone. Low, steady. "Response is en route. Maintain position." And I nodded slightly, not for him, but because the words confirmed what was already in motion. And I spoke just loud enough for Brenda to hear. "Understood." And that single word carried more weight now than anything said before, because it marked the point where this stopped being contained within her authority, where it moved beyond the gate, beyond the cul-de-sac, into something that followed rules she did not write. And she exhaled sharply, a controlled breath that did not quite hide the tension behind it. "This is unnecessary," she said. But the conviction was gone, replaced by something thinner, something less stable. And I rested my hand back on the steering wheel, feeling the faint vibration of the engine, steady, consistent, unchanged by everything happening outside. And I looked at the gate again, at the metal bar that had been lowered with such certainty just minutes ago. And it looked different now, not because it had moved, but because what it represented had shifted, from control to evidence, from barrier to record. And I spoke. One more time, not to provoke, not to escalate, but to make it clear, to make it final. "You can still choose to open it," I said, calm, direct, "or you can keep explaining why you did not." And that choice hung in the air between us, simple, unavoidable, and Brenda stood there, caught between the version of herself she had already shown and the reality that was now unfolding, and for the first time, the outcome did not feel like something she could decide, and the red light on my dash kept blinking, steady as ever, capturing the exact moment when control stopped being hers and started becoming something else entirely. The word choose lingered in the air longer than anything else that had been said that night, and I watched it land on her, not as a suggestion, but as a weight, something she had to carry whether she wanted to or not. And for a moment Brenda did not move, did not speak, just stood there with that same rigid posture. But the confidence behind it had shifted, hollowed out just enough to show the strain underneath, and I could see her thinking, not about what was right, not about what made sense, but about how to recover, how to step out of a situation she had already committed to without losing the image she had built in front of everyone watching. And that is the part people like her never plan for, the exit, because they assume there will always be one. And the guard by the keypad looked at her again, this time openly waiting, his hand no longer near the control box, his stance no longer aligned with hers. And that small separation was louder than anything else, because authority only works when it is shared, and right now it was not. And the radio on his shoulder crackled again, softer this time, like it was fading into the background along with everything else she thought she controlled, and Brenda exhaled slowly, then adjusted her grip on the coffee cup, a small movement. But it gave her something to do, something to hold on to while she searched for words that would put this back in her favor. You are trying to intimidate us, she said finally, and there it was. The shift from control to accusation, from certainty to defense, and I shook my head slightly, not dismissive, just clear. No, I said, calm, steady. I am giving you time. And that answer landed differently, because it removed the conflict she was trying to create and replaced it with something she could not argue against. And for a second, she looked at me like she was trying to understand what that meant, what it implied. And then the distant sound reached us, faint at first. Easy to miss if you were not listening for it. But I was, and so were the guards, the low hum of an engine approaching from the main road. Steady, controlled, not rushed, not loud, just inevitable. And I saw the second guard turn his head slightly, just enough to catch the direction, and Brenda noticed that too, her eyes flicking toward the street entrance before snapping back to me. And that was the moment the timeline shifted from something she could stretch to something she could not stop. And I leaned back slightly in my seat, resting both hands lightly on the steering wheel. Completely still now, because there was nothing left to do, no more questions to ask, no more statements to confirm. Everything that needed to be said had already been said, and everything that needed to be recorded was already captured, and the engine of the approaching vehicle grew louder, more defined, the sound of tires rolling over pavement, consistent, unhurried. And the guard by my window stepped back another half step, creating even more distance, not from me, but from the situation itself, like he was instinctively trying to separate himself from what was about to happen next. And Brenda straightened again, trying to reclaim that posture, that presence. But it did not sit the same anymore. It did not carry the same weight, because now there was something else entering the frame, something she did not control, and she spoke again, quicker this time, like she needed to fill the space before the sound reached us completely. You could have just said sorry, she said, and there was a trace of something in her voice now that had not been there before. Not quite frustration, not quite disbelief, but something closer to realization. And I looked at her, steady, unchanged. You could have just opened the gate, I replied, and that was it. No emphasis, no edge, just the simplest version of the truth. And it landed harder than anything else because of how late it came, because of everything that had already happened, and the headlights appeared at the end of the street, cutting through the darkness in a clean, controlled line, not flashing, not dramatic, just present, and the guards both turned now, fully aware, their attention pulled away from Brenda for the first time since this started, and I could see it clearly. The moment her authority stopped being the center of the situation, the moment it shifted outward, and she followed their gaze, her body turning just slightly, enough to acknowledge what was coming. And in that small movement, that slight turn of her shoulders, there was something she could not hide anymore, not from them, not from me, not from herself. And that was the understanding that this was no longer her decision to manage, no longer her scene to control. And I sat there, exactly where I had been from the start, engine idling, dash camera blinking. The gate still closed in front of me, but everything about what it meant had already changed, and as the vehicle rolled closer, steady and deliberate, the quiet certainty settled in, not loud, not dramatic, just clear, that whatever happened next would not be decided by who demanded an apology, but by who had already chosen to document the truth. The headlights rolled closer, slow and steady, cutting across the quiet street until the beam reached the gate and washed over all of us at once. And no one spoke when the vehicle came to a smooth stop just outside the cul-de-sac, engine idling with a low, controlled hum that sounded nothing like urgency and everything like procedure, and the door opened, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate, and the man who stepped out moved with the kind of calm that does not need to announce itself, and I saw the guards straighten instinctively, their posture shifting before they even realized they were doing it, because recognition does not always come from a name. Sometimes it comes from presence, from the way someone walks into a situation like it already belongs to structure, not emotion. And Brenda stayed where she was, but her shoulders tightened, her stance no longer centered, and she adjusted her grip on the coffee cup again, though it had long gone untouched, and the man approached the gate without looking at me first, without acknowledging the audience, his attention moving directly to the two guards. "Evening," he said, calm, neutral, and they both responded almost immediately, their voices lower now, more careful. "Evening, sir." And that single word changed everything, not loudly, not obviously, but completely, because it shifted who they were responding to, and he nodded once, then glanced at the gate, at the control box, at the positioning, taking it in with a quick, practiced scan before turning his attention to Brenda. "You are in charge here," he asked, not assuming, not accusing, just placing the question exactly where it needed to be, and Brenda lifted her chin slightly, holding on to what she could. "Yes, I am the HOA president," she said, her voice controlled again, but tighter, more measured, and he nodded once more, acknowledging the title without reacting to it. And then he turned his head just slightly toward my car, not fully, just enough to register my presence, the position, the engine still running, the dash camera blinking, and then back to her. "Can you explain why access is being restricted?" he asked, and the way he said it mattered, not aggressive, not confrontational, just clear, structured, leaving no room for performance, and Brenda stepped forward half a step, reclaiming her space. He refused to comply with community standards and was disrespectful during an official meeting, she said, her words sharper now, faster, like she was trying to establish the narrative before it could be questioned. "He needs to apologize before entering." And there it was again, laid out plainly, the same demand, the same condition, and the man did not interrupt, did not react. He simply listened, letting her finish, and then he looked at the guards. "You were instructed to deny access based on that condition?" he asked, and they hesitated, both of them, just for a second, and then one of them answered, quieter now, "Yes, sir." And he nodded, taking that in, then finally turned his attention fully to me, his eyes meeting mine through the windshield, and I did not move, did not change anything, just held that same steady position I had maintained the entire time, and he gave a small nod, not greeting, not recognition, just acknowledgement, and then he spoke again, this time to all of us. "All right," he said, and that phrase carried more weight than anything Brenda had said all night, because it signaled transition, from what had been happening to what would happen next, and the street seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the porch lights, the silhouettes, the guards, Brenda, all waiting for the direction that would follow, and he stepped closer to the control box, not touching it yet, just standing there, looking at it, then at Brenda, then at the guards, and finally he spoke, calm, precise, "We are going to clarify this," and there was no room in that sentence for interpretation, no space for negotiation. Just a line being drawn, not by volume, not by force, but by authority that did not need to prove itself, and Brenda opened her mouth slightly, like she was about to speak, to correct, to redirect, to reclaim, but she stopped, just for a second too long, and in that second the entire balance shifted again, because hesitation at the wrong moment does not look like thought, it looks like uncertainty, and uncertainty does not hold control, and I sat there, still behind the wheel, still inside my car, watching it unfold exactly the way I knew it would once it moved beyond her, and the red light on my dash kept blinking, steady, patient, recording the moment the situation stopped being hers and became something that would not bend to her voice anymore. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Because the moment he said we are going to clarify this, everything tightened into place, like a structure finally locking into alignment. And he reached out and lightly tapped the metal housing of the control box with 2 fingers, not pressing anything, just acknowledging it, as if to say this is where the decision lives. And then he turned back to Brenda. You stated access is conditional on a personal apology, he said, not asking, just restating, and she nodded, slower now. Her confidence no longer automatic. Yes, she replied, and he let that hang for half a second, before continuing. And you are identifying that as enforcement under your authority as president. And again she nodded, but this time there was hesitation woven into it, like she was beginning to hear her own words differently. Yes, she said, quieter, and he shifted his attention to the guards again. And you are acting on that instruction. And the first guard answered, yes, sir. But his voice had changed, the certainty replaced by something more careful, more measured, and the second guard did not speak at all, just gave a small nod, and the man absorbed all of it without reaction, then stepped slightly to the side, aligning himself with the gate, the car, and Brenda in a straight line, like he was placing everything into a clear frame. All right, he said again, softer this time, but more final, and he looked at Brenda directly. Then we are going to separate 2 things, he continued, his tone even, structured, community preferences and property access, and the distinction landed immediately, because it cut through everything she had built around this moment. And Brenda opened her mouth to respond, to push back, but no words came out right away, and that pause said more than anything she could have said. And he did not fill it for her. He let it sit, let the difference settle into the space between them. And then he turned his head slightly toward me. You are the registered owner of the property beyond this gate, he said, not as a question, but as a confirmation, and I nodded once. Yes. And he gave a small nod in return, then looked back at Brenda. Ownership access cannot be conditioned on a personal statement, he said, calm, precise, and there was no emotion in it, no judgment, just a boundary being stated, and Brenda's grip on the coffee cup tightened again, her knuckles paling slightly under the floodlight, and she shifted her weight. This is about respect, she said, her voice thinner now, less controlled, and he acknowledged that with a slight tilt of his head. It may be, he replied, but respect is not a requirement for entry. And the sentence landed with a kind of quiet finality that could not be argued with, because it did not attack her. It did not challenge her position directly. It simply removed the foundation she was standing on, and the first guard glanced at the control box again, then back at Brenda, waiting, but this time not for permission to act, but for direction on how to correct what had already been done, and the second guard shifted fully away from the gate now, creating a clear path that had not existed before, and the man stepped closer to the control panel, his hand hovering near it, still not touching it, still allowing the decision to remain with her. You can open it, he said, not as an order, but as a statement of option, and that was the moment everything focused on Brenda, the porch lights, the silhouettes, the guards, even the quiet hum of my engine seemed to pause around her, waiting for what she would choose now that the situation had been stripped down to its simplest form, and she stood there, looking at the gate, at the control box, at the guards who were no longer aligned with her the way they had been minutes ago, and then she looked at me, really looked this time, not as an opponent, not as an audience, but as the person she had tried to control, and there was something in her expression now that had not been there before, not confidence, not authority, but recognition, and it was quiet, almost invisible, but it was there, and she turned back toward the control box, her movement slower, more deliberate than before, and for a second it looked like she might say something, might try to reclaim the moment with one last statement, but she did not, and instead she reached out, her hand steady but no longer certain, and pressed the button, and the gate responded immediately, the motor engaging with a low mechanical hum as the metal bar began to rise, smooth, controlled, inevitable, and the sound of it moving carried across the street, through the silence, through the watching eyes, marking the exact moment the barrier she had used to assert control became the evidence of it being taken away, and I sat there, still behind the wheel, still exactly where I had been from the beginning, and watched as the gate lifted, inch by inch, until the path in front of me was completely clear. The gate reached its full height with a soft mechanical click, the motor winding down into silence like it had done its job and stepped out of the story, and for a second no one moved. Not the guards, not Brenda, not even the people watching from their driveways and windows, because moments like that do not end loudly. They settle, they shift, they redefine everything that came before them. And I kept my hands on the wheel, feeling the steady vibration of the engine, the same rhythm it had held since I first pulled up, unchanged by everything that had happened outside. And I looked straight ahead through the open path, through the space that had been denied to me just minutes ago, now completely clear, and I did not rush it. I did not press the gas right away, because movement matters when it happens after stillness. And I let one more second pass, just enough for the silence to register, just enough for everyone there to understand what had changed and what had not. And then I eased my foot onto the accelerator, slow, controlled, the tires rolling forward over the gravel with a soft crunch that sounded louder now in the quiet. And as the car moved under the raised gate, I glanced once to the side, not turning my head fully, just enough to take in the scene one last time. And the guards had stepped back completely now, no longer part of the barrier, just standing there. Their posture neutral, their attention no longer fixed on me, and Brenda stood a few feet behind the control box, the coffee cup still in her hand but forgotten, her shoulders no longer squared, her stance no longer anchored, and she was not looking at me the way she had before, not with expectation, not with authority, but with something else, something quieter. Something that did not ask for anything because it already understood there was nothing left to demand, and I did not slow down for her. I did not acknowledge her beyond that single glance, because this was never about her in the way she thought it was. It was about the line she crossed and the moment she chose not to step back, and the car moved fully past the gate, the rear wheels clearing the threshold that had held me there. And as I continued up the driveway toward my house, the porch light growing brighter in the windshield, I could feel the shift settle in completely, not as relief, not as victory in the way people usually describe it, but as something cleaner, something quieter, the kind of resolution that does not need to be announced. And in the rearview mirror, I saw the gate begin to lower again, the metal bar descending smoothly back into place, returning to its original position, but it did not look the same anymore, not after what it had been used for, not after what it had become. And the headlights from the other vehicle remained at the entrance, steady, controlled, not following, not leaving, just present, and I turned into my driveway, the tires shifting from gravel to smooth concrete, the engine lowering its pitch as I eased to a stop, and I sat there for a moment, the same way I had at the gate, hands on the wheel, the dash camera still blinking, still recording, and I reached over and tapped the screen, ending the recording with a soft click, the red light disappearing. The moment now stored, complete, and I looked up at my front door, the same door that had been waiting behind that gate, unchanged, patient, and I let out a slow breath, not because of what had just happened, but because of what it had revealed. And as I stepped out of the car, the night air felt different, cooler, quieter, like the tension that had filled it minutes ago had been pulled away and replaced with something steadier. And I closed the door gently, the sound final but not loud, and as I walked toward the house, I did not look back again, because there was nothing left to see, nothing left to confirm. Everything that needed to happen had already happened, exactly the way it always does when someone confuses control with power and forgets that real authority does not argue, does not demand, it waits, it records, and when the moment comes, it does not need to raise its voice at all.